But no, I'm stoked. So to be a factor.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Ward 2 Neighborhood Advisory Board meeting. We are actually going to start now since we have a quorum and it's 5:31. Madam Chair, if you're ready to call the meeting to order.
Let's call the meeting to order at 5:31 p.m.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum of the Ward 2 Neighborhood Advisory Board.
All right, call the roll. Agenda item A1.
Thank you. Hal Taylor. Max here. Stacy Shin. Here. Thank you. David Sitzel.
Here.
Audrey Keller. Present. You. Patrick Fisher.
Here.
Roman Schoenberg.
Present.
Stan Dowdy. Not present. And Donna Keenan. She informed us she would be a little late today. And Vice Mayor Dewar isn't here yet either. Yeah, you have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item A2. Is there anyone present for public comment today?
Just the public observer.
Well, hello.
I'm looking for two.
Madam Chair, our first item today is public comment. Members of the public may hear, observe, and provide public comment virtually by registering through the following link, which can be found on reno.gov/meetings. And that link is https://links.reno.gov/links/48FMW5K. Comments heard under this item will be limited to 3 minutes per person and may pertain to matters both on and off the NAB's agenda. The NAB may not take action upon any matter not agendized on today's agenda. When you're called on for public comment, please state your name for the record and begin speaking. The timer will begin when you say your name and you will be afforded 3 minutes. If you're an attendee in the Zoom meeting and would like to make public comment, please raise your hand at this time. There are no public comments, Madam Chair.
All right, we're moving on to agenda item A3, approval of the agenda. We have a motion.
Approve the agenda.
All right, Audrey made the motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
All right, and Ronan for second. We have approved the agenda.
All in favor, please say aye.
Oh, thank you. That's why you're here.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. The agenda is now approved. Okay, so the next agenda item is our council liaison. She's not present yet, so we will hold for that.
Vice Mayor, let me know she will be here in about 5 minutes. Scotia.
Okay, so let's go to A5, staff liaison report, and we will get back to the vice mayor when she arrives.
Jennifer Alberts, community liaison for the record. The update that I have is the next NABS will be November 19th.
All right. So,
That's it. Thank
okay,
you.
that was easy. We're already on to B, business items. B1, presentation and update on the Title 18 zoning code cleanup.
Hi, do you guys want me to
Welcome.
stand up or would you like me to sit?
If you guys sit down there, it's so our recording can pick up your audio.
Perfect.
We will run your slides.
Great,
Yes.
okay. All right, well, good evening, members of the NAB. For the record, my name is Lauren Knox. I am a senior planner with Development Services, and I'm here to talk to you about the Title 18 code cleanup, just to give you an update on kind of where we're at. Right, next slide, please. Okay, so let's start with some background. In 2022, council initiated a text amendment directing staff to clean up some portions of our development code, and this was really following an overall massive rewrite that we did in 2021. So with that big of a rewrite, it was understood that there's probably going to be some items that need to be cleaned up or maybe have not been working appropriately. So that's what staff has been working on. It was recognized pretty early on that with that big overhaul, there were a lot of items. So we had staff tracking nearly 400, actually probably about 500 items that were problems for us. The zoning code cleanup was focused on these items and finding ways to better implement our zoning code as well. Next slide. Thank you. So there are a number of items that are not part of this effort currently. Some of these are separate text amendments. Some of these were also contemplated to be part of this code cleanup, but are no longer included because we've determined that there needs to be a bigger conversation or more focused conversation, or maybe it's out of the scope of a cleanup and is a little bit bigger. So these items you can see on the slide up here. So accessory dwelling units, we're working on a separate text amendment for that. Short-term rentals aren't included in here. Changes to the noise ordinance. Changes to tree protection standards. This was one that was included, but we recognize that we need to have a much fuller conversation. So that is pulled out of this particular cleanup. Updates to the sign code, again, a full separate text amendment, and then updates to our telecommunications regulations. All right, so we first came to the NABs in June of 2023 and have since held a variety of engagement opportunities. So you can see them on the slide overhead. We've had 7 technical advisory committee meetings. We've been to the Historical Resources Commission 2 times. We had a variety of smaller meetings, those focus groups, things like going to the landscape architecture or the school district, NAOP. We also had 9 stakeholder meetings. We've been to the Planning Commission 3 times, as well as City Council. So again, we tracked over 400, closer to 500 items that really needed to be addressed. There are about 660 pages of very technical document with a lot of red lines. We tried to annotate it. It's a lot of information. So I'm going to try and give you a high level summary of kind of the bigger things that were changed, but I'm happy to answer questions on anything. So in terms of use allowances, we cleaned up the table of allowed uses to make it a bit less confusing. As you can see on the screen overhead, we had 4 to 5 different categories with footnotes and 4 different footnotes, and it was just very confusing for people. So we tried to clean that up a bit. We also found that there are certain uses that were allowed in certain locations that maybe needed to be pulled back a little bit, or maybe they should have been allowed. For example, things like warehousing were permitted outright in maybe districts that it wasn't appropriate. We also have additional use standards. So you can see kind of to the very right of this column, we have this use specific standards section. We noticed some maybe were missing and we needed to include in some sort of standard to help with that use. Car washes, for example, is an example. We didn't have any use specific standards, but we recognize maybe we need to have some, especially if they're neighboring certain types of uses and you have the loud, the sprayers going and the blowers. So we tried to clean those pieces up. And then for our development standards, so current code limits the number of stories as well as the height of a building. Typically, height really drives that design. So we now are going to shift to just looking at height. That's what proposed, at least. Just looking at height and not looking at stories necessarily. This is much more comparable to what other development codes do. Again, looking at that height. And we're not changing that piece necessarily unless there was a weird inconsistency in there. But removing that kind of stories function. We also had quite a bit of confusing language in the lot and building standards that were cleaned up. We have tables that have just a bunch of information, and there were pieces in there that weren't really making a lot of sense. For protection of neighborhoods, so we've seen increasing issues in this arena. We attempted to introduce a bit more to protect neighborhoods. So there were, again, some additional use-specific standards. So like I mentioned, car washes earlier, for example, where we thought maybe we should add a little bit more to protect some of these neighborhoods. We increased our residential adjacency buffer trigger. So before, if you had a non-residential development coming up against a residential zoning district, if you were in 100 feet of that, we had specific standards you had to meet. We increased that trigger to 300 feet to try and capture some of those areas where maybe we weren't capturing and we should have been. We added some more compatibility requirements in some of these uses, and then some additional setback and step back requirements for those taller buildings, so they're not towering over, your neighbor, your residential neighbor. And then changes to industrial type businesses. So we added some compatibility items here. This was another kind of rub piece for us. So again, looking at some of those uses and saying, where are they really allowed? Where should they be allowed? And fixing that table where they are allowed. Data centers. So that is a new use that's come kind of up and coming, and we're getting a lot of more calls and inquiries on data centers. So we included those as a use, have a definition, have some standards with them. And then our warehouses, we added some new standards to help mitigate those impacts. So things like their dock doors, their loading doors, making sure they're not facing residential areas, or that we have proper screening and things in place to try and protect those neighboring properties. And then our screening standards. So we have this in code currently. And right now it attempts to introduce kind of a screening or buffering aspect between various zoning districts. Where we've run into issues with that is we have a lot of mixed use zoning districts. So you can have a commercial use and a residential use and they're right up next to each other. We are recognizing that we need to maybe have some screening standards between uses, not just zoning districts. So we introduce, it's the same type of table, but looking at uses instead of those zoning districts. And then fencing. So our fencing standards were pretty confusing, not only for staff, but for anyone who came in to try and get a building permit on fencing standards. You look at the standards and you're trying to figure out what you're supposed to do, where you're supposed to go. So we wanted to make that a bit more user friendly. The standards are still the same for the most part, but simplified some pieces in there and just tried to make it more clear. And then there was also a bill that was passed that required permitting of battery charged fencing that we needed to address. This was part of the legislative session, so we put some verbiage in there to address that state law requirement. So exterior lighting was another confusing item. So we currently in code, we have 3 ways that we look at and review lighting, 3 measurement types, I should say. So we look at lumens, foot candles, and kelvins. Very technical. Essentially, we can't really look at lumens in the same way. There's not like a measuring device for it. So we pulled that back, again, more comparable to what other zoning codes have. We're looking still at things like foot candles. That looks at the spillover on a property. So we're still ensuring that, you know, we're not having lights just shining off of different buildings. So we're still looking at that spillover and we're looking at kelvins, and that's the temperature lighting. So you have that really bright blue white light, and then you have that warmer kind of yellowy warm glow. So we're still looking at those pieces. We also limited lighting near residential zones. Again, within 100 feet of residential zoning, we're limiting that lighting height. And then the spillover requirements were expanded to basically all properties, not just residentially adjacent properties. So again, trying to address that mixed use function where you can have things right next to each other. We want to make sure we're not causing impacts to our neighbors. So school standards have been a big topic of conversation lately. We have certain requirements for schools that we have to be consistent with our neighboring jurisdictions with. So that's the county and the city of Sparks. We're not touching those, we're leaving those pieces in place. But what we did try to do was add in some verbiage to deal with some of the issues we're having with loading, drop off, pickup, some of those traffic and pedestrian related issues and the pedestrian traffic pieces. So we're trying to head that off at the pass, have those conversations as early as we can within that development review process. We're also trying to address an issue we have in terms of these very large schools being cited. So we have proposed to kind of create a mechanism where schools over a certain size require a discretionary review, meaning they come to the NAVs, they come to the planning commission. So we really are just trying to head off some of the issues that we're having as early as possible in the process.
Before you leave that one, just a note, to go back to,
Yes.
the 400, I asked either you or someone to check with Turkey Meadows Regional Planning because their number's 350. And, I've talked to Jeremy about it too.
Yeah.
And he was supposed to be calling you too.
Yep.
So I wanted to kind of link it up. And
Yeah.
I know it's a different kind of standard, but nevertheless, this number 350 shows up and I thought it should be the same.
Yeah, so they've gone 350, they've gone up to 500, and I did touch base with Jeremy. We're in conversation about what that looks like, and he asked, you know, where we got our numbers from, and so
Right.
we're definitely on board with linking
But
that up.
this is something I sponsored because we've had so many, both charter and regular schools come in and the traffic impacts are quite large. And many of them, including the regular Washoe County Public Schools, don't have the right kind of lighting for pedestrian through student safety. And we've had to, after the fact, after they've been built, either push them to put in it or we've co-funded it with them, but it's really been a struggle. And so we want, and this is gonna be a little pushback, because Washington County Schools and already told us they don't wanna come in. And they think that their process accomplishes our process, but our process really looks at something different. We're very intentional about traffic, pedestrian safety, lighting. And theirs was different. It was a broader kind of 5-year planning process. It looks at different things. So my recommendation is gonna be all schools over this certain threshold. I don't care who owns you, whether you're a Christian school, a Jewish school, a non-denominational charter school, whatever you are, public or private charter school, that if you're a certain size, it's not about who you are, it's about the impact you have. And the reason is that charter schools, don't have buses. So the traffic impacts are really intense. Every single student has to have a drop off up and back and a pickup up and back. And that puts a tremendous drain or impact on the roads. And there is a $14 million grant program at this legislature to allow charter schools to get some kind of busing. But apparently none of them have applied for it because it's just a short-term grant program and they're worried about establishing a precedent. What do they do after the grant program's gone? So very few people have taken advantage of that. So I just wanted to interject. And while I'm speaking, I just wanted to, I apologize for being late, but apologize, I have to leave early. While in the last hour, I was asked to, I had to go to something at the university, which I just finished. And now I have to go represent the mayor in her place at the ACES, where we're celebrating our firefighters and speak for her. So I'm gonna have to leave just in 30 minutes, but I did want to stop in and say hi to everybody. So sorry for the interruption.
No, it's great. I think it's something you've been working on, I know, for years and years.
For years, I set up a special committee on regional planning to look at this. And it got stopped at the Regional Planning Commission and they never moved forward. So that was a big problem. So I figured, okay, I can't control certain things, but can have an impact on other things. And so at least in Reno, we want to get ahead of this issue.
And I'm guessing we'll have time to get, we skipped your report, but we can go right to you after this is over.
Yeah, I don't think, 6 o'clock, I don't know the clock. I have to basically leave
It's
in about
5:48.
minutes.
In
Basically,
10 minutes.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I could interrupt you further and just pause you at this moment and do my report before I leave. I should, do you mind?
Whatever you want. I only have about 3 slides, but if you would.
Why don't you
rather-
do your other 2 slides?
Okay.
And then before you do your discussion, I'll quickly do my report. Okay?
Okay, I'll be fine. So with rules and definitions, so we cleaned up some of the definitions. We needed to clarify things like amplification, for example, was an archaic way to look at it. So we tried to fix that a little bit. Various definition pieces were fixed. And then the measurements, some measurements, we updated some of that verbiage on how things are looked at, like lot depth, lot width, rounding. And then we alphabetized our definitions. They were put in there in a weird way. It was difficult to find certain definitions. So we tried to, again, clean that up, make it more user-friendly. And then in terms of more information, so if you're seeking more information, again, this is a very technical, very large document. There's a variety of ways that you can interact with this. Our website has a ton of information. Feel free to reach out to me whenever, submit public comments, review those red line changes, that 660-page document, all those annotations, however you want to review it, there's a variety of ways. And then lastly, I think it's just the next steps. So again, we're in that collecting feedback, getting that engagement piece. Currently, we are anticipating a formal adoption in the fall and winter 2025 timeframe. So again, we're at the neighborhood advisory boards for October. We plan to go to Regional Planning Commission in either November, December, and then to council probably in January. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, but I'm happy to answer questions later.
Well, this will give you time to think of your questions. I only have a few things to cover. First of all, I'm glad to see great attendance here at the NAB. We're kind of refreshing a lot of our boards. For example, the Urban Forestry Board had, I don't know, we lost some people, they moved away and suddenly we only had a few. So I'm interviewing a bunch of people to get a kind of a fresh perspective from some new people. But anyway, I just wanted to say, that the upcoming city council, we just had a review. We do this about 10 days out. And there are some things coming up that I thought the NAB has either seen or might be interested in. And one of those is the Bella Vista Ranch 2. It's coming up at our next council meeting on the 23rd. So I know I've already heard from a variety of public groups that are very concerned about it. And, I'm expecting a fair amount of letters, or at least I've heard from enough people that, and I have some issues. I've already expressed those today. There's about a mile of water that will be closed off as a result of the project. And, when this project came before us last time and they were doing the same thing, we denied them, at the council. Because they weren't providing alternate water or some kind of mitigation for animals. It's illegal to kill horses, wild horses. It's not illegal to kill animals like coyotes, rabbits, and other smaller animals, squirrels, etc. It's not illegal to kill them. But all of the animals depend on some kind of water. There's really no springs or large water areas up in the Virginia range. It's very few and far between, and they're very far from each other, wherever there are some. So, it's my belief, and I've already said this to the applicant, I've said this to staff, I'm gonna be saying it at council, that we have about 5 sections of our master plan that call for protection of wildlife, protection of wildlife corridors, and so on. And, so I'll be bringing that up at council. I don't know how it will go. I don't know who others, it really wasn't addressed by staff. They're just silent on the issue. And I think, when you're closing off a mile of water, it's not like an incidental impact. You know, I think it's fairly significant. So, and it's the only water, other than we've just created some water and are doing our fencing program for the horses. That's started now. And it will take a few months to complete. They're sort of doing it in phases. I guess, they started at the north end. So that's moving ahead. So I did want to do some kind of social media post. I haven't gotten around to it yet, but it just started last week. The other thing coming up on the city council agenda is a really interesting project that is proposing to abandon a street. So the street is Stevenson. And, we've abandoned a lot of alleyways over the years. And the way it works is if the city got the alleyway for free, we're gonna give it to people for free. We're not gonna charge them. And we've done it many times. But when it comes to streets, it's a little trickier. And places that the city council gave away streets before have ultimately, a number of them become issues later, might be 5, 10, 15 years later. An example is, the Renaissance, which used to be the Sienna, which used to be something else. We gave away part of Mill Street. So you can't drive Mill and then just turn on Center, right? Or excuse me, Virginia, right? I guess you can turn on Lake. Anyway, so that, you know, it interrupted traffic process. Another one that comes to mind is we gave away a portion of Washington Street. This is years ago, council did, for PUD, Plan Unit Development. It morphed again, and it morphed again. And the fourth morph turned into what's now known, I think, as the Riverside Apartments. Well, and it's right there where the hub is on Riverside, you know, the new brick. Okay, and it had a fair amount of impacts. It impacted trees, for example. It's a big concern of mine, but we got an appeal and we had a very big hearing about it. A lot of people are very concerned about building something on the street that we abandoned. Originally, it was supposed to be still a street with angled parking. But it ended up being developed on, so you can't go down Washington and hit Riverside, right? So this would be the same thing. It's off Second Street, I guess, and you would go north on Stevenson. They want us to abandon it and put in angled parking, and that's their plan today. And I said, that's fine. And I actually think the city should do that itself without abandoning it, without giving away the property to a private developer. But what I'm long-term concerned about is what if happens when it's now their property? They could build on that street. Right? And so now we've suddenly impacted our travel process through downtown Reno. And so that's kind of, I just have some questions. I'm concerned. Apparently the project's gone through numerous iterations. So we'll be discussing on council, you know, next Wednesday, not tomorrow, but the following Wednesday. It's just, it didn't come here, but you know, as a resident, you might be interested if you think about downtown.
And they want to close.
They want to privatize it, and I learned today that they want to keep it open, but they want to put in an app for parking, which I'm not opposed to. It's rather than parking meters. But I guess what I'm saying is, why don't we keep the street and take the revenue from the parking? And
Yeah, yeah.
like, why do we have to privatize it and
And that
have
would
them
be,
take the revenue?
And that would be the only place you do the app in town is the one block?
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know, I mean, there could be some pros there, like maybe the city doesn't have the money to reconfigure this one block of street. And
Some franchise.
that,
Some franchises, people who don't. use
Yeah.
apps.
and I asked today, would they be charging the same rate that the city charges for parking or something different? So anyway, there's questions, I just have questions, I haven't made up my mind. What's that? Okay. One more thing I just wanted to tell you about that's kind of interesting, I learned today that, the city, the airport has its own firefighters, okay, 28 firefighters. And they not only respond the airport, and I've been the recipient of their response. One time, I was on a plane, and when I got on the plane, I was putting my luggage up. And I banged heads with the flight attendant, and I got like a concussion. And I had to like get moved into first class. I couldn't stop crying for like 3 hours. I'm sure my seatmate was like, oh my God. But anyway, they offloaded me first and, you know, the paramedics at the airport. But they don't just respond at the airport. They also have a lot of external property. And some of you may have eaten at Albitas, for example. It's a Mexican restaurant about 2 blocks north of the airport on Vassar, well, near Vassar and Terminal Way. They just had to close because the airport owns their property and the airport wants to redevelop their property. But the bottom line is if there's any fire, the airport has bought a lot of property and now it becomes airport property and it's not on the city tax rolls in the same way. They don't pay city taxes. And it's been confusing. Do the airport firefighters respond, which they have, or do the city? And so as of, if we approve this, we are going to take over the fire department at the airport. We are going to respond at the city to these buildings. We're gonna have the airport firefighters respond at the airport. There's a lot of specialized training they have for putting out fires on airplanes and stuff like that, crashes, whatever. That our firefighters don't have that training. On the other hand, these firefighters don't know how to fight a structure fire very well. They're not really trained on that, even though they have to fight structure fires from time to time. So if this goes through, it's a 5-year plan agreement with another 5-year extension. And we'll charge a fee, but they'll become Reno employees, 28. They'll have the same Reno contract, all the things. So I think that's very interesting. And it's sort of a step towards this sort of big issue we haven't talked about, which is consolidation of the fire departments. When we and Washington County were together as fire departments, it was called regionalization. It was an agreement, but it wasn't a joint powers authority. So a joint powers authority has the ability to manage, administer, sell bonds, have its own board. That's what I did at Flood. The Flood Management Authority was when I started, it was a cooperative agreement. And in 2009, about 4 or 5 years later, we got it to be a joint powers authority. We had to go to the legislature, get special powers to do this. Well, that is what this new fire department, conversations are gonna start January. And it would consolidate this time Reno, Washington County and Sparks. They would be under a new board. They will go to the legislature for discussion and consideration, not this session, but 2 years from now. So 2027. And so we're already thinking about it, planning. We haven't had any meetings about it, but I've heard a lot of chat in the community about it. And I think this, consolidating Reno and the airport is sort of a step in that direction. So there's a lot more on here. There's everything from a new health center, a community health alliance that we're building, to soccer fields that we're designing, to grants we're getting for the California building, almost $1 million to help renovate it. So I just want you to know the council very busy, doing a lot of different things. And so I highly recommend you check out their agendas from time to time. But I know Bella Vista came here. And so that one in particular, they delayed it twice. So it's finally coming back. So, now's the moment, I guess. Are there any questions for me? And I guess we have some folks online too. Yeah. Adri.
I remember when Bella Vista came in, Mr. Tom Dolan was, his project was here, suited up.
Well, no,
His
no.
passing,
no.
body was here.
Let's just stop there. Bella Vista is owned by Sunny Hills Development. It has nothing to do with the Dolans. And their representatives are Garrett Gordon, the attorney, And, Richard Rogers, is our consultant. So, just to be clear, the one that Mr. Dolan was interested in was the canyons
Or the canyons.
nearby, but completely different projects. This project, Bella Vista's had a PUD since about 2007. And, so it's just hanging out there, and they're now building a bridge. They're going to build a bridge with Lennar, which is part of Daybreak, which is now called Dallas Valley. And so it's at a kind of an interesting confluence where the South Meadows Parkway crosses Steamboat Ditch. And on the other side are these two developments. So a little different, not up in the hills, on the flats by Steamboat Ditch. All right, other questions? Good. Okay, well, thank you very much. I think I have to push off. I know this is gonna be an interesting conversation on Title 18. I did want to say I was very supportive. I was surprised when they put the tree ordinance in, but I was supportive of taking it out because it needed a larger conversation. It's not something you can just do a update. You know, like it needed a more thought. And one of the controversial issues that Lauren has been dealing with is what's an update and what's a substantial change? And it's in the eye of the beholder. And we could argue it from now to the cows come home, as they say, but things that they're doing are things that they think are not so substantive, but you acknowledge some of them are. I mean, even bringing schools in, now having to go through a different whole process. I mean, many people would say that's a substantive change, but it seemed like right now was the time to do it and not lose any ground. There's a lot of schools stacking up that want to come in.
We just had the controversy and then this shows up, so it seems a little weird.
But at the Matter Academy,
Yeah.
well, actually, the controversy's been brewing since Doral Academy, which was 6 years ago. That's why I started the group at Truckee Meadows Regional Planning.
Yeah.
But the fact that it just came up and the fact that it has a simple fix so that we can have public participation in these schools. Right now, it's, well, technically, the public can participate. It's an individual planner reviewing the project at their cubicle without a lot of public input. People might be writing in, but there's not like a public debate. And so this will change that. It will come to the NAB. It will go to the planning commission. That's a big change. So it's a big change, but you know, and so maybe technically isn't an update, but it's something that is urgent, needs to be done quickly.
Well, that's one of the smaller things that weren't actually updates on here. I mean, bigger things like stuck signs and installations.
But you took signs out.
No,
It's
signs
not
is not-
in there, but I mean. for
Yeah.
example, that was like
Yes,
crossing the boundary.
yeah. This is more like a threshold question of
Yeah.
what goes to planning commission and what doesn't, so it seems appropriate here. Okay, yeah, so it was great seeing everyone. I didn't expect this just an hour and a half ago, but here we are. So, okay. Anyway, we'll go celebrate our firefighters and the great job they did on the Davis fire.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, take care. Thank you.
We're going back to B1, correct?
I thought we were not.
It's
That's
Title
okay.
18.
Right, but we're B1, she's B1 on the agenda.
Yeah.
We're going back to that, right? Is
Yeah.
that what you're asking a question about?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Okay,
Okay. See you guys. Thank you.
so questions? Sounds like we have some.
Just for the record, catching my perspective. The news asked for two things, but, it was not, we obviously what the red line is and how to actually look at the details of these online. It's dated March something, is that what we're working from?
That is
That's the
correct.
one that went to council in August, is that correct?
Yes.
And then the comments that council made in August about certain things have not been incorporated into this.
No, because we wanted to have that one document that we're getting all of the feedback on. So that was the document that went to planning commission. So that's kind of the version that we want everyone to be commenting on now. With all of the feedback that we get and the council feedback that we received, we'll come back with another draft, but that is the
That is
correct one.
the one, so council was collecting comments, not really directing at that point in August. Those comments about what they liked and didn't like were not actual direction to change.
There were comments on, we asked for some specific feedback, so we had heard certain things. For example, I'm just pulling one that I have on the top of my head, tattoo parlors. During our conversation with the planning commission, it was brought up that why do we treat tattoo parlors differently than other personal services? Why is it called out and very heavily regulated in certain locations? So that is some feedback we received, and we said, okay, well, here's a potential fix to that. We can consider tattoo parlors the same as a personal service. It's what a lot of jurisdictions do. And so here's a potential red line. Or here, council, this is kind of a way we can go. We want to get your feedback to be able to go incorporate that in.
But you're just still collecting.
Collect it,
I
yes.
just want to make sure, because I thought, well, March, a long time ago, and I know I've spoken at, I don't know, public meeting about this since. March.
Yeah, we're working from March, a lot of changes. We want to make sure we get a lot of
I'm
feedback.
wondering, it's still then. Whoever's responsible ultimately for this, the intention to change the definition of multifamily. To be with 5 and a half units as opposed to more than 1 unit.
So this is where the confusion came in with multifamily specifically. I wish there was a way I could easily show you. So from the previous zoning code, the one before 2021, we had basically, you had single family and you had multifamily. So those definitions, it was basically anything more than one was going to be considered multifamily. However, in the code rewrite, so the code that we've had since 2021, we have single family, we have duplex, triplex, fourplex, and then we have multifamily. So those, that preclusion from the multifamily piece would be very confusing with the duplex, triplex, fourplex, because technically they're all more than one,
Yeah.
but they're not.
How's it fourplex not multifamily?
But for our use, our use type,
How is that not?
it is still
Not single
multifamily, but not a use type. We have those 5 different use types, right? Single family, duplex, triplex, fourplex, multifamily, basically apartment complex.
Right, the multi. There's uses and there's structures. Go to
Correct.
LMS,
Mhm.
it's about structures, and 5 and up is a commercial.
Yes, correct.
I wrote it,
Yep.
but anyway.
Building code as well.
LMS defines
Mhm.
basis on commercial real estate, actually, which I think is 5.
Yes, 5, no,
Yeah, so there's that, and then there's the uniform building code, which also defines
5 and up, yep.
5 and up.
Mhm.
And now you have 5 and up, okay, that's great, so that's a building, all those are talking about a building, and we're talking about uses.
Uh-huh.
So we're talking about, you know, single family, duplex, triplex,
Yep.
fourplex uses. But if you call them, take them out of being multifamily, there's a bunch of things that trickle back in Title 18 that says multifamily gets this. So if if a fourplex is no longer multifamily, well, gosh, they're no longer subject to different changes in outdoor lighting or, landscaping. There are a lot of ways this trickles backwards, and I don't see any adjustments for that. And if there's a fourplex up, you know, in my single family neighborhood, which now the intention all along is to make that allowable. So I'm sure that's gonna come back from last summer. So if somebody takes my third of an acre and puts up a fourplex, I don't think all my single family neighbors should be all that happy about no lighting control, no landscape control, no parking control. Since I live in a single family neighborhood theoretically, which it will no longer be. So I'm thinking, although I understand that those other multifamily uses in today's code, they're multifamily uses. But all these other definitions are about multifamily buildings, not the same thing. So I don't know why you have to go back and say, oh, we only have this many things, because the code calls out fourplexes, not multifamily, single family, the code calls out triplexes and duplexes. So by trying to grossly categorize things, I have a big problem with it because there's so many splashbacks and it trails off in so many different directions and conflicts, including with the master plan, by the way, which defines multifamily as more than one. You can't even do master plan conformance with findings on this. I'm sorry I'm ranting, I just remembered all this. But, because this came up like an ox. But if you want to do master plan conformance, it doesn't comply with the master plan even to do that. Definitions aren't the same. And they can't have a different definition than what's in the master plan. You can't get it passed with the findings, right? So there's that, and it's buried in the definitions. We're absolutely nobody's gonna know about it. Nobody reads the definitions. So if you guys aren't calling this stuff forward to let people know what you're actually doing, in the context of all the things that got taken out of the housing proposal, some personal, I don't know. I'm kind of rest already know about a bunch of other stuff. You're gonna find out. But this particular one I thought was, talk about lack of transparency. Nobody's mentioning it to anybody. It goes about 10 ways to Sundays to affect lots of code changes and build out, so you can find that change. You do setbacks in infill neighborhoods that nobody really knows about because it's such a generic conversation. We don't look at the details. It has really pretty some significant impacts all in a pile to, you know, not just our neighborhoods, but all kinds of neighborhoods. I mean, there are overlay districts and PUDs that prohibit multifamily, which as it currently stands is more than one. And it also, some of them have, I think, all this Ranch Act, which says the administrator can comply, is responsible for making this comply. So they don't even have to take a vote. The administrator can just make that change. So if you change the definition of multifamily, why happens that? More fourplexes are no longer multifamily, so now they're allowed. You know what I mean? It's like there are lots of ways this trickles down there. I think I'm sorry.
Is this the channel for her concerns, or is there another venue that you want her to?
Yeah, that's totally fine. I've written it down here. Again, we weren't trying to do anything nefarious. We're trying to marry up. Yeah,
So
no,
political, people.
I understand. Yeah, we're trying to marry up those use types with definitions because they weren't matching. But I hear that there may be significant impacts, so we can definitely go back and take a look at that. If you have any specifics or anything that you really want to make sure we look at, seriously, email me. I want to alleviate those issues. We don't want that kind of issue. So happy to.
I know not many people in this room were following all these things in housing that went along the way for the last couple of years. But this was really big hot deal last summer and last winter. And lots of stuff went into the housing changes that then had to come back out for all these reasons. And I'm actually trying to be supportive because it ends up being a point of contention and accusatory behavior by members of the public. This sort of thing, like, you're doing this all kinds. So it concerns me on behalf of the city, and definitely not a bad way, this is what I'm trying to say.
Sure. Yeah, always trying to be transparent. Again, that this entire document, it's a lot, and I know that. The whole thing is annotated to say why we did a change that we did. Almost every single change in here has sometimes a paragraph of why we changed something.
Not that one.
Not trying to be nefarious, so anything, I'm happy to take feedback.
Things like that, I should.
Yeah. Please do. Yeah, my contact information is on that website, so you can just email me directly from there if you want.
On the code change.
The code cleanup website, yep.
Audrey?
Audrey Keller. Thank you for being here, by the way. Could you share, I have a couple of things I'd like you to just expand on, so I understand them. The zoning code cleanup, you say, tighten up, restrictions to protect residential neighborhoods. Could you give us some examples of like, what are you telling, what are you sharing with us? What do you, like, what's an example of that? That, I think it's slide 2.
Sure, yep, on that protections and neighborhood
And
lights.
sort of broad executive
Yeah.
overview.
So again, have a variety of things here,
Right.
armed and ready.
Right.
So in terms of those additional use restrictions, that's that first kind of bullet point there, kind of what are some use restrictions for these more intense uses? So outdoor facilities and activities related to animal facilities. So that was. Wait, which portion are you talking about? I'm sorry.
Page 2, tighten up restrictions to protect residential neighborhoods. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, give us some examples.
Yeah,
of
can
that.
you go to slide 7, please?
Yes.
Thank you. So these are some of the things we did. So those additional use standards for certain use types, some were missing entirely. So you could have say you had a car wash next to a residential area and you have that booming sound from the vacuums or from the sprayers or people out vacuuming their cars. So trying to add in new standards for that, or drive-throughs, trying to tighten up a little bit if we needed to for the sound from the speaker boxes. Warehousing, those loading dock doors and making sure they're not facing residential areas and facing something that could have an impact on those neighborhoods. Again, screening is another piece that would help with that kind of protection in neighborhoods piece. We used to do it zone to zone, but that's not helping in an area where you're allowed mixed use zoning, and those mixed use zones said, oh, you don't have to screen between the same zoning district,
Okay,
but it might be appropriate to screen between a commercial use and a residential use, right?
we have that example. I live in Ranchera.
Uh-huh.
And we have a commercial building right in the middle of our residential PUD.
Right.
And it's not screened, it's not fenced, it's a nothing. And that's important because we want to protect our property values, because that commercial building one day could be something nobody really wants in next to their house. So that's why I was asking, what are the protections? And then as it might be helpful to other neighborhoods, when you change the development standards on the height, making the height, you remove the limits of the number of stories. Is that for residential versus commercial, or is that for everything?
No, so all of the zoning districts they basically each have a table that has these certain requirements. So it's your setbacks, here's how tall you can go, here's your lot size, all of those pieces, right? So in the height section, we had a height, say it was, and I'm just making one up, don't quote me on this one, say it's 35 feet. Okay, we also say you can only have 2.5 stories,
Right.
a lot of times. So it's confusing which one actually is supposed to be regulated. And the reality is the form and function of that area and the impacts to neighbors is really on that height, right? It's not necessarily on if you have 2 stories or 3 stories, it's that towering look or feel. So in terms of being consistent, we said, let's get rid of the stories conversation, because a lot of times it was a half story and it was confusing for people. So we said, get rid of the story piece, let's talk about height only.
So that applies to residential.
Yeah, anything that had a story component to it, industrial had it as well, the non-residential's had it as well. All of the zoning districts, we just said, let's be mum on stories, but let's talk about height.
So are you changing the height in residential, or are you just making it, and you don't care what stories there are inside? Because we have multi-story inside our.
Right, so
Report that.
sure, so we don't care about the stories anywhere.
Right.
There are some zoning districts, and I can try and pull it up right now, that we did amend the height on. Let me pull. this up really quick. All right, so height was changed on. It was limited.
Have multiple story, if it's helpful, multi-story, I think they're townhouses
Mhm.
attached. And some of them exceed
The height,
the height of our clubhouse, which is distracting.
right?
And they're about to build more of those, so I'm guessing they're gonna come to planning, which is why I'm asking about height.
And it's difficult too. I believe Ranchero's planned unit development, which has its own handbook. So they're subject to their own standards that they already got approved. But in the future, a lot of times when you create those handbooks, they're based off of a standard zoning type framework.
So
So for the
it's not gonna
future,
retroactive our
Correct.
PUD.
Correct.
So our PUD will stand.
correct. Yes.
Okay, that's good.
But on SF 11, so that's our single family 11 units per acre. We used to have a 30-foot height cap. We went up to 35 feet, and that was to be consistent with other similar single family zoning districts.
It's a 4,000 square foot lot, that's why it was lower height initially compared to tiny small postage stamps. So in time, what we've done is about overcrowding and overbuilding smaller dots. So there was a reason that it wasn't as tall as everybody else, because it was already a very small street in the middle of everything. Right. On this floor, so I realize that a lot of the things we're doing are for consistency. But back in 2021, when all this was happening, there were reasons that things weren't doing the same everywhere. Sure. Like Moana Plum, those streets, and changing the heights from 35 to 55 feet. There was a reason they were only stay at 35 feet, not walk 55 feet. You know, There was a reason in 2021. They did up to national direct.
Okay, yeah, so, yeah, the single family ones, for example, the,
Oh, this is the most.
right, but the less dense single family and the one right next to it, which is multifamily. So you have SF11, prior to that you have SF8, and after that you'd have MF14. So this is like a continuum, right? Both of those two surrounding it have a 35-foot height limit. This one only had 30, so that's why we attempted the consistency, but I hear you.
Right. Not everything needs.
Is that the red line document that you have,
Right here? Yes.
and that has all the annotations?
Yep, and this is the same thing that you would find online right now. It's the same exact printed one. Like I said, it's large, but yes, it has all the annotations.
Audrey Keller, back again. When you're talking about business types, new business types, we have an EV charging site
Mhm.
that probably wasn't in original code. And they are really unattractive, big blocks, power commercial.
Mhm.
And then they take up, what's interesting is how many parking spaces they take away from wherever the existing parking was. So are you addressing that? Is that an industrial business? And how, I'm just curious about
Yeah.
that.
So we're not addressing that one specifically. It's kind of this weird place. There's kind of a shift in terms of some places are now requiring that you have EV charging, a certain number of EV charging stations, and we're not doing that here, but there's this weird shift in conversation, so we're not addressing it now.
So that's omitted from, that should be on your slide. You're not talking about that.
Not talking about EV charging. Yeah, we're not talking about a lot of things, but yes,
Okay.
EV
But
charging
you
is.
should put that in slide. And then one more about fencing.
Uh-huh.
Because we have wild horses and horses are important to our community. Horse fencing. 'Cause
Yep.
that's in that Bella Vista Ranch.
Yes.
Piece that Naomi was bringing up about horse fencing.
Yeah.
That we're safe and that the babies wouldn't get caught in the barbed wire,
Uh-huh.
all that kind of stuff.
So there is a specific section of code that addresses wildlife habitat management specific to horses. We've been working with Tracy Wilson.
Yes.
So we are putting in different language based on kind of these issues that we're having, and we're working very closely with her to get basically language that she thinks is appropriate to be in here.
Right.
So that's things like return gates. I know kissing gates are a thing so that
Yeah.
people aren't leaving the gates open. Let's see if there's other. When you do kind of that pre-construction trenching, making sure that you have that temporary fencing up. So there's a variety of horse-related fencing pieces separate from that one that you see there, specific to the horses.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
That's right.
Does anyone else on the board have a question?
Yeah, Peter Stoneman for the record. I'm looking at slide 5 in particular, the table with all the different residential component codes and everything. So I just want to know how much of this has changed versus how much of this is just clarifying what is already in code.
I would say, I mean, a majority of it is staying the same.
Specifically, maybe in the
yeah.
residential column, I
Sure.
was thinking maybe that SF11, SF8 fringe for the duplex triplex
Yeah.
was the previous discussion.
Yeah,
So that's the new stuff.
no, so this is what's in code currently.
Oh.
That one specifically, we, it was part of this housing initiatives text amendment that Donna had mentioned earlier. We did propose changing, instead of it requiring a CUP to have, say, a triplex or a fourplex in SF8 or 11. Right now, you're required to go through a conditional use permit process. We did, as part of attempting to increase housing choice or accelerate that housing piece, which was a state requirement, we did try to introduce, okay, do we want to maybe take that from a conditional use permit just to be outright permitted? And that was a no from council. So it's not in there. We did have the conversation.
We also were adding it to the other residential districts. That time.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, there were changes in there too, but yes, that was one of the
And
pieces.
down on the left side of the column.
The SF3 and SF5, we did introduce it as a conditional use permit piece. I think it's conditional use permit, it may have been permitted, but that was also scratched.
Okay, so I was gonna ask, like, the C is conditional use,
Yes.
and there would have been 2 more columns of Cs to the left
Correct.
in some world, but those aren't happening.
That world did not happen yet.
That is a bummer. But, okay, then I have one last question, partially a comment though, like, does Reno, does the city actually state like a goal of their zoning? Like what is their zoning just to protect housing values for wealthy people, or is it just to, or is it to actually like meet these goals of like making housing affordable again?
So generally, I'm not gonna say it addresses specific housing. Generally, the zoning code, our development code attempts to implement our master plan. So our master plan has a lot of stated goals, has a lot of guiding principles, actions in the actual master plan. There's an entire visioning process. What does Reno want to be for the next 20 years? So the zoning code attempts to implement that. Does it have specific, this is what we want for housing? You know, I don't believe it's gonna be quite as specific as you're talking about here, but why don't I just pull it up? Talk about its purpose. So Article 2, this is at the very beginning of the code. So when you go online, you'll see kind of the whole start of the code.
Sure.
Article 2 describes that purpose, and there's A through I points. So it lists a lot of stuff. The main purpose is to implement that master plan.
Right.
But yeah, you can look at that and see kind of all of the various goals it does have.
How is, oh, then my last question, I guess, is how is council allowed to ignore your recommendations when not having P's further to the left is like completely at odds with the master plan?
There were concerns expressed about not having this discretionary review piece in certain neighborhoods. So they were really looking at the protection of neighborhoods and what that looks like if we were to go full permitted or not. And they weigh their findings and how they want to go. It's their policy direction is that council's direction, and they did not want to move forward with that at that time.
When's the next time staff can make a recommendation? So I'm paying attention.
For housing related items, we just passed that housing initiatives piece, which you can also see on the website. You'll see kind of that timeline and how we went about that. I can't see us coming up with additional housing pieces right away. I mean, we just had the conversation and we don't want those pieces in there. So
ADUs. That's fine. And then
ADUs is the next conversation. Yep. So kind of the same, a little bit different, but kind of again, housing related. So ADUs, we did a survey, a big survey to see, okay, do people want ADUs? Do they not? What does this really look like? Because right now we really don't allow it except for very, very key pieces or few pieces in the city. So that conversation will be coming back. We want to get through this for the most part, but that conversation will come back probably after the holidays. So January, February of next year, we'll start to have that conversation again about, okay, we're drafting an ordinance. We got some feedback already from council on that ordinance. So we are trying to push that along. Again, different than this very specific
it's
piece.
A bit smaller of a
Yeah,
step.
it is.
Yeah.
It is. But that is the next very specific housing related.
just to about your concerns, the housing thing that did get passed does have a lot of positive things. For making more affordable housing and more bonus things that go in there to allow both federally supported level housing as well as workforce level housing, so it's not like the thing is less because they didn't handle with the larger single family lots. Yeah. A lot of things in there and a lot of the stuff they're trying to do now. People development. It's not like nothing happened like it.
Oh, no, definitely, yeah.
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 On that website, you can see some of those pieces too. There's kind of an expedited building permit for affordable housing
Yeah, that's
piece.
right.
Yeah, and there's the density bonuses for both affordable housing and for small unit sizes. So there were definitely some pieces in there. Just that specific one you mentioned was not wanted at that point in time.
Yeah, thank you.
Other folks
I
have
have
a
a
question?
question. Roman Schaumburg for the record. Were there any external consultancies or outside groups used to make recommendations?
There was not a consultant for this specific code cleanup item. We did have consultants for other text amendments, the ones that you saw that are not part of this code. We did have some consultant input on those ones, but this particular one, no. We did have a technical advisory committee that we ran the red lines through. So those are the folks that generally work with the zoning code on probably a daily, if not weekly basis. So we did run it through a technical advisory committee, and then stakeholders and through the various.
Is that
feedback.
information on the technical advisory committee available online? Members and such?
No, that information isn't online. I can pull a list if needed, but basically it was anyone who had submitted an application or who had reached out or, we work with very, very frequently. So a lot of the planning-based consultants, permitting consultants, all of those folks who, again, touch the zoning code, because it's a very technical document. Those who touch it all of the time were included in
Were
that
there
advisory.
like public members at large on that committee, or was it industry only?
On the advisory committee, I would not say there were any public members at large, but we did take the same information to those 9 stakeholder meetings. And those were definitely members at large. A ton of people are on that stakeholder list, including the members of the NABs. And I have updated that list, so everyone's gonna be there again.
All right,
So,
but do you have another question?
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Oh, thank you. That's all I. Do you want me to send you? Where I found this one?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Yes. Yes, go ahead and shoot me an email. That email address is on the website. My phone number's on there as well. When it's in writing, it's a little bit easier for me to go and start to dig into those specific pieces.
Actually, this is sort of, but some of it does, I put just this building. I just building, that's, I should write as public comment instead of technical things or having one that separated.
Any way that you want to attach it. If you're wanting me to look into something and try and address it in some form or fashion, sending it to me is great. If it's just some comment that you would like for the planning commission or the council to hear, there's also that submitting public comment piece that you can do. But if there's something very specifically that you think could be at least looked at prior to us going back to
Definitions.
planning commission, then that would be very helpful to see the specific concerns you have.
That whole tabulated comment.
The public comments that we received.
Yes, you know, that way that it's just tabulated in spreadsheets or all there.
Yeah, I'm not sure the format that we're gonna have right now to give that, but yes, we will include public comment that is received or any comment that is received. We'll include everything we can for the record, for sure. Sure.
Okay, moving on. Agenda item C for commission's committee member reports and announcements. Do we have any this evening? All right, moving on to D. Does anyone have any suggestions for future agenda item? All right, Audrey.
I don't understand why this little nap is not getting, as part of our agenda, a standard approval of the prior minutes. I mean, mechanically, we shouldn't have to look at minutes 3 months down the line. So there was no minutes to approve, and I think mechanically, there's room for improvement. I don't know what your hurdles are, but, I would encourage you to, every time we sit, we should have approval of the prior minutes.
So we are waiting on our minute taker.
Who's your minute taker? Waiting for what?
Our minute taker reviews these meetings and summarizes them, so she watches all of them by hand. She does the minutes for all 5 different advisory boards, so she's very busy. She's an excellent minute taker, and we're very confident in the skill of her minutes. I know she's listening right now. So she goes through these meetings, watches them live, and goes back and watches the recording to make sure the content of the discussions is captured. As a reminder to all board members, the recordings of the meetings are available on YouTube the day after the meeting. So if you're unsure of the comments and you want to go back and check them and make sure you match the minutes, you're welcome to do that. And of course, when we can get the minutes finally, we do our best, but sometimes our minute taker has other things going on, vacation, family life, don't know. But we're very happy with the work, and we're happy to continue
working with her and getting the minutes as they come in.
And we're the ones that post the YouTube link, so typically that's done before they. If that helps at all.
Okay, do we have your email just mechanically now? Because we have Tyler's,
Sure, I can take exactly
over that the NAB should have, so we can ask you questions.
definitely. I have some content, so I'll provide those.
Okay. All right, thank you. You could just email us all of this.
That too, I will definitely email you.
That would be a lot.
That would be great. Does anyone else have a suggestion for a future agenda item? Okay, good.
No.
We will move on to the final public comment.
Yes, comments heard under this item will be limited to 3 minutes per person and may pertain to matters both on and off the NAB's agenda. The NAB may not take action upon any matter not agendized on today's agenda. When you are called on for public comment, please state your name for the record and begin speaking. The timer will begin when you say your name and you will be afforded 3 minutes. If you're an attendee in the Zoom meeting and would like to make public comment, please raise your hand at this time. I did notice one person earlier. Yep. Can you please unmute yourself and state your name for the record?
Yes, hi, my name is Beth Dory. How are you? I'm very confused about your definition between single family and multifamily. And it seems like if you're streamlining the code, that should be defined as the way most people define it. A single family is one home on one lot. If you want to change the zoning, just say so. If it's fourplex in a formerly single family zoned property, then I think to streamline everything and to be transparent, it should be defined that way. And then there was a young man in a City of Reno shirt that seemed to be smirking a lot at one of the commissioner's statements. And everybody, I'm able to see everything online. And so I think everybody deserves respect. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for letting me say that.
Thank you for your comment. And Madam Chair, we do not have anyone else registered for closing public comment. Is there anyone in the room who would like to give closing comments?
I have a question. I'd like to do. Diane Keats for the record, public statement, public comment on my own behalf. Again, as I've spoken about before, this Title 18 thing, I don't know how many you follow it. It is actually a pretty big deal for everybody, for businesses, residences, multifamily developers, whoever it is, it's a pretty big deal. The staff has been working on it for, well, ever since the last code was approved in 21, it seems like. So it's been going on for a long time. They're doing a really good job at pulling out big pieces. There's something about the sign ordinance that's been changed. It's on planning commission tomorrow night where they're gonna allow everything downtown to go to 100-foot neon signs on all businesses in this particular district. Nobody knows about that. Really not a good idea. It doesn't have to be on the side of the casino anymore. It can be anywhere in the district. Just so you know, it's something if you're the user of downtown or a resident of downtown, and tell people who live downtown, they're gonna have nothing but unpleasant shining in their windows. Because it's supposed to be restricted, and right now, change that. So there's a lot of stuff that's really important. I would encourage everybody on this board to look at city council agendas a little more carefully, follow the links to some of the projects when we get the development and the bills, and see what's really going on. This is been a very, very busy council. There's so many things going on. You can't possibly know about them all from this meeting. And it's easy to get notices of all that stuff, every development project, whether it's in your neighborhood or not, if you care about the larger city. There are a lot of changes in this code that affect how we'll be built out down south. A lot of stuff happening up north. For example, 500,000 square foot businesses won't need to go through public review. in these text amendments. Well, if I lived up north, I mean, the councilwoman and people up there was not real happy about taking that out of public review and just letting it go forth. Things like that happens everywhere, whatever measure of material you're supposed to will be affected, not necessarily the bad way, but you never might want to have something. So, and as a citizen, that's what I'm doing to help that my 14 NAP board members continue.
Thank you for your comment. And that is all for public comment.
All right, then.
Oh, we have one.
One more, sorry. No, Keller. I wanted to thank Tyler. And give him a bon voyage to his next role,
Yeah.
And thank you for your courteous service. It was always, very helpful to me, having a new person. And now he's moving on. And, I just want to thank you, recognize you.
Thank you. I'm teaching Jen everything I know, so
He's
I have full confidence that she's gonna be forward for a while and do a great job. Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with all of you and out. I wish Ron was on the record.
Thank you, Tyler. All right, we are on to agenda item F, adjournment. Do we?
Adjourn.
All right, that's first. We have a second. Right, all those in favor?
Bye.
Aye. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler.
I think so.